Arkane Studios was founded in 1999 by a former EA Games quality assurance and localization specialist, Rafael Colantonio, as well as 6 other developers, 4 support staff, and just over £1,000,000. It would be 3 years after their founding before they released their first game, Arx Fatalis, to better than average reviews, but it was not a smash hit. Nobody really bought it. Originally designed and developed as an Ultima game with the blessing of one of the series' original developers, they did not have publishing rights. EA had the publishing rights and refused to let the game be made without provisions, likely a disproportional percentage of revenue, and possibly Raphael's firstborn. Thus, development was pivoted to a new IP, and Arx Fatalis was born, but nearly never published due to their first publisher going bankrupt about a month after the contracts were signed. Critically, Arx Fatalis' higher-than-average game reviews gave the small, scrappy developer the opportunity to work with Valve to develop a game on the Source engine. Originally designed as a sequel to Arx Fatalis, this new game once again had difficulty finding a publisher due to the low sales volume of the original. Ubisoft caught wind of this development and wanted to breathe new life into their Might and Magic IP purchased in 2003. This gave Arkane the opportunity to pivot once again from the game they had been working on to start developing Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, removing the publishing woes that they had been experiencing previously. With a refined combat system and fewer RPG elements than Arx Fatalis, Dark Messiah would lay the groundwork needed for Arkane to go on to develop the highly acclaimed Dishonored series. After having played both Dark Messiah and Dishonored, and it's been a long time since playing Dishonored, my faded memory of the years past can still see the mechanical framework hiding somewhere beneath the surface. Would Dishonored have been as good if Dark Messiah hadn't preceded it? Perhaps. But let's take a look at that in further detail. The combat and movement mechanics are clunky, and your body has an odd feel that makes precision actions nigh impossible. The momentum while moving, which includes the combat, gives the impression of weight, but it's more of the fading impression left on a memory foam pillow rather than a snow angel. For a game that was developed using an engine built for first-person shooters, the adjustments made by the developers to the movement mechanics make the player feel heavy, but not with purpose. You move the fastest forward, strafing is slower, and you move backwards at a snail's pace. This makes backing up to dodge an incoming attack very difficult, so strafing is the way to go. Hit detection feels fairly consistent if you're able to maintain accuracy. Especially when using staff weapons, which I preferred for a good chunk of my playthrough, your camera shifts as you swing weapon. This was, understandably, done to improve immersion. It ended up being more bane than boon as I played. A limited inventory system does exist, with some items such as potions and scrolls being stackable. It isn't overly important as it's not a loot-heavy game, and item placement is primarily fixed within the environment. New weapons can sometimes be found early within secrets, or during the normal course of playing. There are no shops, no currency. Outside of the equipment, you have the boot. You get a dedicated key for kicking, whether that be enemies or objects in the environment. This can be done to break the enemy's guard, send them absolutely flying into the all-too-common spike walls, or off of high ledges and bridges to get instant kills. I ended up losing track of how many enemies got the "This is Sparta" treatment in the 6 hours that I played the game. The weapons themselves are split into 3 overall types. Daggers are fast but with lower damage output, swords are the middle ground with decent damage and decent speed, and staffs are the slowest but strongest for base damage output. Staffs also have the benefit of being able to stun opponents and make crowd control a little bit easier, as well as being able to send enemies flying with glorious mid-2000s ragdoll effects. There are a few bows to be found for ranged combat, and a magic system as well, though I can't speak to that as I did not use it at all. The bows feel good for the time, however the arrow drop-off makes landing really long shots more challenging, and it lends the feel closer to what I imagine a real bow feels like than the sniper cannons found in other games. Before getting into the story itself, this is a full spoiler video, so if you have not played through the game, and I don't know that I'd recommend it, at least it's not a long investment. There is a type for this type of game, and it definitely pulled my interest a whole lot more 15 years ago when I was half the age I am now, after I grabbed it on sale from Steam and played through it. Sereth, the main protagonist of the story and your character, is fully voiced, though has frightfully few lines. There is such little dialogue and even monologues that result in little to no characterization. You are a cardboard cutout of a character, and everyone else is too. The player being a blank slate is not the worst thing to be, but this is a voiced character. Sereth has a personality, in theory. You're along for his ride, his journey. But the personality itself is so weak, a faint breeze threatens to lay low the fragile house of cards it's built upon. The other characters that speak to Sereth very rarely can be described as dialogue, and generously at that. Airport novellas have characters with more fleshed out personalities and higher quality interactions than what you will see here. In order of appearance, there is the wizard Fenrig, who is Sereth's mentor and provides nothing to the story outside of the tutorial and subsequent call to action. Zana, who accompanies you for the entire journey for the most part, serves as the primary source of interaction with Sereth. And finally, Liana, who you meet relatively early and pops in and out of the story. The only other character of note is Arantir, who serves as the villain. You see him only a handful of times and directly interact with him twice. And yet, this limited interaction with Arantir is the primary force that drives the story forward. From your first arrival to the town of Stonehelm, nearly every moment in the game, Sereth is on a conveyor belt of the idea of a narrative. You get no agency for much of the story, though there are a few choices much later that can lead to a couple of different endings. Much of the plot is predictable, and the story doesn't have the depth to make it compelling. The writing and voice acting has a decidedly B-movie tone that would better fit a direct-to-DVD release. But we're not there yet, and it may be a little while yet before we are. There is an introduction cinematic, of course, and the trademark tutorial dungeon. It's punctuated by stock notification sound every 10 damn seconds to tell you that there's a new explanation on top of listening to your mentor, the wizard Fenrig, tell you to do the exact same thing. Kick here, climb there, grab the spider key, do some platforming, open a chest, grab the sword, cut some rope, kick that zombie so it flies 30 feet, slams into a jagged bit of stone, falls down 20 feet. Now you need to stab it to make sure it's dead. Now there's mercs. Kill them, get the crystal, and get the hell out. And that fades directly into another cutscene telling us our next steps. Get to Stonehelm, but you can't go alone for reasons. So Fenrig summons up Zana, a big-tittied, sultry lady, in the physical realm, just for her to be absorbed, I think, into you. I'm not sure what the logistics there are, and I'm fairly certain I don't want to ask. I'll suspend that disbelief for my own sanity, and so should you if you intend to follow along. Crossfade to our exposition procession on horseback as we approach Stonehelm, provided by the inner voice of Zana. The city is completely closed off, but we've got a letter of introduction, so we're allowed in. But wait, now the city is under attack. We almost die, get dragged inside, and then get up with the same limber that I used to get out of bed in the morning. We get to complete another platforming section and then kill an undead Cyclops with a ballista. Holy hell, that ramped up quick. Where is this going to end up? The unfortunate reality is that it's going nowhere for a long damn time. But it's a good thing we can have a cryptic dinner with the guy who we gave the crystal to, whose name is apparently Menelog, after checking the IMDb page, and get a couple of hours of shut-eye before his estate comes under attack, because of course it does. Fight through the necromancers and the mercenaries just in time to see Liana's uncle get absolutely wrecked by a ghoul after the said uncle chucks the main villain out of the window. The ghoul grabs the crystal and jumps out the window too. What follows is a short exchange, and Sereth running across the rooftops in pursuit of this ghoul. This is where my issues with the movement system hit one of the lowest points in the game. I can see the intent. It's supposed to be a rooftop chase at breakneck pace with tension created by the player wanting to catch the ghoul as fast as possible. It falls so flat it may as well be two-dimensional. There is, to my knowledge, no actual timer for it. No way to fail but to fall down the streets below, an instant death mechanic that just puts you back at the last quick save or checkpoint. It makes a lot more sense within the game to pursue your target slowly, methodically, to hunt it. In direct contradiction to the music, the tone of the situation, and the stakes that have thus far been presented. The best presentation of this is that I caught the ghoul and wailed on him for a solid few seconds to no effect. He just kept going along his pre-scripted route. Then they get away, but the next level is a warehouse infiltration. A warehouse that leads to an underground complex in the first mandatory stealth section. See, the ghoul got the crystal to Arantir, and you need to get the crystal back. Now, Arantir's up and walking around like nothing's the matter, like he didn't just get thrown out of a window at 100 miles an hour, so it's actually somewhat dangerous. But there's a convenient lever that opens a whole bunch of prisoner cages and distracts him, so between that and a modicum of patience, you can get the crystal and hightail it back out of there. And once that hightailing has been completed, the loading screen is interrupted by a remix of the cinematic where Zana is absorbed into you. You get to see that she's actually a demon. Fenrig summoned a demon, and it appears that she just literally jumped down your throat. I think he might be a little less good than what Sereth had initially thought. He didn't seem like a nice guy to me at all, more Saruman than Gandalf. But Sereth, in a rare moment of awareness, does actually attempt to address this with Zana upon entering the next math, but she brushes it off dismissively, and Sereth takes this at face value. He has all the intuition and intelligence of a potato in a microwave. And now you get to meet the second thirstiest character of the game. She's barely sad that her uncle died, and now that you're here with the crystal, and she can continue on. It's also here that Zana gets a lot more active. There's hardly a comment made by Liana that doesn't end up causing some sort of quip from Zana.
This. Ooh, so decisive. Trying to impress someone.
Generally dismissive, derisive, or in direct contrast with what Liana said to begin with. And once you get to the ship, you need to get on it, clear it out, lower the gangplank so that Liana can board safely. Yeah, at least it's not an escort quest again. Directly following what could charitably call the wave defense section, Liana fawns over you, even going as far to say, quote, "I just want to thank you again and tell you that you really become very important to me," end quote. You have spent less than 30 minutes with this chick and she is smitten. But it's vision time again. This time it's a spooky ship with ballroom dancing featuring Liana, Antir, and Homicide, much foreshadowing such foreboding. Then there's a 30-second expository boat ride, but wait, you get Liana's health bar on the upper left, so now it's escort time. But luckily you can tell her to sit and stay. Even better, once the killing's done, she'll come running like a good little scripted AI with all the complexity of an Excel macro. But while we're on a tangent, let's talk about the design of the environments. So far, we've gone through, in order, a dungeon, a fantasy castle and its associated town, a manor complex the size of a small neighborhood, an underground complex, a sewer, a docked boat, an ancient village, and now we're approaching a large temple. And yet, I find that the environments don't actually stand out as being appreciably different outside of the textures, which aren't that great to begin with, given that it's 2006. There are what appears to be words on some of the columns, as an example, and should be read left to right, I think. But they rotate the columns, textures and all, to place in the world, so the writing is either straight, leaning 45 degrees one way or another, or just plain sideways. I also found a few instances where the geometry didn't quite meet where it should, and I was able to see out into the void. It stared back, wondering what I was doing with my life. You're led into the temple by a lone guard that had barricaded the door when the orcs attacked. But then why is it that you fight orcs within 3 minutes of entering the temple? Did you just close the door and sit there hoping that he wouldn't be found by the orcs that obviously found a different way in? Well, we'll wave the plot wand. Liana gets to move a big rock in the central chamber, and you get to fight a new enemy, goblins. They're exactly like orcs, but smaller and faster, and certainly more annoying. Keep going, and they end up blocking your path, so you return to Liana with your tail between your legs, defeated by pre-scripted events. And with perfectly fantasy timing, the Paukai arrives. It's a wyvern, but it does end up looking more like a Gore from Morrowind, but with spikes and wings and a few more teeth. You have to kill it with the door since you're not strong yet. This is the beginning. To get stronger, you need to go through spider caves and advance the plot. Granted, there's not much to talk about for a while, pushing through groups of spiders, goblins, figuring out where the game wants you to go. There's no map, not one that I ever found. Not surprising, as that was still somewhat in vogue at the time. Once you get outside, you start fighting orcs again, which brings me to the enemy design. There aren't very many of them. Let's list off the main ones. Zombies, mercenaries, orcs, goblins, necromancers, spiders, and floaty squid things. They probably have a name. Everything else is just a variation. The vampires that show up later in the game are just stronger mercenaries, and like the orcs, are grouped into 3 or 4 types. Ranged, slow with sword and shield, fast with no shield. 7 enemies, 2 of which have 3 variations, about a dozen total varieties outside of the boss enemies, of which there's only a couple. Even for a game that only lasts 6 hours, that's pitifully low and doesn't allow for much variation in the actual combat encounters, as you generally only fight 1 or 2 factions at a time. There's not much more to say about the enemies. I thought it'd take us good long to go over. But I guess that about a minute's good enough, at least for where we are now. Emerging from the spider cave, you get to the cliffs. Get up those and kill the orcs. Maybe get thrown off a cliff by an orc in revenge for all of the orcs that you booted off in a similar manner. Which does have some half-baked irony to it. Some incredibly annoying terrain traversal, and you unlock the elevator. If you explore just a tad, because a tad is all you're really allowed to do in this game, You'll find a perfectly functioning forge, because why the hell not? There's a steel ingot earlier in the level, and you can go through and process and make a longsword. A weapon that was already outclassed by a set of daggers and a staff that I had found earlier. From what I was able to tell, there were only 2 opportunities to forge in the game, which begs the question of why. Why have it at all? It's not a meaningful mechanic. It doesn't really fit in the game. It makes sense in open world games. You might be spending well over 100 hours with your characters in those. This is, for all intents and purposes, a linear game. Do you remember any crafting system in most linear games? No, me neither. It's a perfectly fair assumption to make. They're all linear story-driven games and don't benefit from a distinctly open world or open linear friendly mechanic. There's the end of that rant, I guess, for now. You backtrack, Sareth, to the entrance of the elevator that wouldn't quite work before. You begin to ascend. The elevator ride up is just long enough for the game to provide some additional exposition to bring the player up to speed on some of the lore needed to contextualize the story, with a half-ton of extra foreshadowing as well for flavor. Some frustrating platforming. I know, I'm saying that a lot. And some rope arrows later, we finally reach where we've been trying to get to for the past hour. Put the crystal in, watch the lights come on, and get challenged to a one-on-one combat with the leader of the orc tribe. The exchange actually provides some additional context to why the orc tribe is there to begin with, and the reasoning is in direct contradiction to Zana's explanation just minutes earlier. Whether that was an intentional misdirection by the character or not, it provides a shadow of the expectation being subverted. It's also the first time the orcs are presented as anything beyond savages. It represents one of the only moments in the game that effectively uses its situation to provide new context without the need for monologuing exposition. The orc tribe is there to guard the temple and prevent any intrusions. It would make sense that then the chief or slash shaman would take a personal interest in you as a tangible threat. But after defeating the tribe's leader, ignoring the potential power vacuum that you might have just created, you take a key, open up a door to your right, and take the shortcut back. Well, at least you don't have to backtrack. Once you arrive back in the central chamber, there's a column of light from the altar center of the room. Leona fawns over you again, because of course she does. You're just simply amazing and the best at whatever you're doing. The fawning, however, is cut short as ghouls arrive, and signaling the subsequent arrival of Aaron's here. I guess he managed to catch up. You slip under the gate while Leona holds it open, allowing you to proceed to a tomb, which is exactly like the dungeons, but now a sarcophagi littered around. This also means zombies, which are, as ever, my least favorite enemy of the game. There's also a new variant down here that spews poison in the clouds, so we're up to over like a baker's dozen enemies now. They still need to be impaled to prevent them getting back up. Go on a little ways and you find a giant spider statue that 4 gems need to be placed in. Luckily, you find the first one on the way in and it opens up the route to the other 3. It is an absolute slog through the zombies, who don't seem to be able to go down properly if they're in water. Instead, they start getting up immediately and, as though they're drowning. No longer lay there waiting patiently to be stabbed in a lethal way. You kill a specter in order to get one of the gems. Once the sarcophagi moves out of the way, you're able to get your first effective weapon against the undead. It's a fire staff. It doesn't shoot fireballs, it has lava on the ends, and you bonk people on the head like every other staff. But it burns the corpses once you kill them, so you don't need to stab each and every zombie individually. Thank you. But after making a budget Assassin's Creed leap of faith into a pool of water, you claim the last gem and take the conveniently located short back to the spider. Place each gem into the spider statue, and each one gets you a vision with Zana, talking about how close the skull is now. This game's MacGuffin and the whole reason we're here. That we've made it to the eve of actually getting the skull without me actually mentioning it before speaks to how thin the story feels, and it has all of the thickness and weight of a fishing line. So once you get into the final chamber of the temple crypt complex 2, still not sure about what this location actually is. It started as a temple, but goes through a crypt and around some cliffs and the transitory areas in between. The big doors open to reveal a weathered 8-armed statue that begins speaking to you, judging if you are worthy of the skull. Because clearing out about every living and unliving creature within a mile of the statue in pursuit of reaching this point wasn't enough. Nope, gotta kill a dozen spiders. Again. Kill them, and you get the skull of MacGuffin. With flawless timing, you have a blackout vision, Leona's uncle, who has a name that I can't remember already, is dead, impaled on a giant spike. Fenrig is there to jump scare you, to fall back and see Liana dead at your feet. Then Zana, in her true demon form, not seen for about 2 hours, crawls up your body and hisses while a voice begins dumping more exposition as Zana kneels, exposing more than would likely be necessary of her body. Big Red Sauron rises from the hole and, oh shit, it's your dad. So he didn't run out on you when you were just a baby, you were just somehow conceived while he was imprisoned for a millennia. Just wave the plot wand again and you wake up from the vision to pick the skull up again, but wait, we need the plot to move just a little bit further after that great revelation with all the texture of stale tap water. Arentir shows up just as you pick the skull up, throws you back, takes the skull, holds you, delivers some additional exposition, and then launches you across the room onto a spike. I guess that's game over. Now, Sereth's garmentless plot device wakes him up just fine, so I guess you get a thirsty demon girl and you get to come back from the dead. You've got none of your equipment, so we've hit the spiritual death and rebirth part of the hero's journey. Time for the transformation. Go get your gear, wreck everything in your way, orcs again, and get back to the ship. Yes, you heard that right. No, you didn't miss anything. We're still on the island we got to all those hours ago. As the primary locale of the game, it's so disjointed in themes of the areas that they don't even seem to be on the same island, let alone the same continent. There's no sense of cohesion. Either you're in a dungeon, or orc caves, or temple, or spider caves, etc. It doesn't feel like a place that actually exists in reality or fantasy. The scale of everything is off, making you feel much smaller than you should seem, which was a common issue from this era overall, but ends up breaking immersion constantly, and I could not manage to suspend my disbelief and let the game actually draw me in fully. I was at arm's length the entire time. This whole section is supposed to feel like a sprint back, so you can get on the boat and back to Stonehelm, chasing down Arentir. Feels as long as the way in, with double the bullshit tacked on. The only reason for this entire section to exist is to pad out the game and provide the player enough skill points to level Sereth up. You know, you make it back to the temple and you're almost free once you start running into the gondolas and orcs. A little while later, you do actually finally make it to the beach and meet the lone survivor of the original attacks by the orcs at the temple who hid behind a door. After the boat ride, you're dumped right down into the sewers at the entrance to the necropolis. As contrived and convenient as it is, taking the time to skip the 30-second jaunt from the dock to the necropolis through the sewer just pours salt on the wound of the hour-long odyssey just coming back from the skull chamber to the boat. You took over an hour of my life for that bullshit and gave me half a minute back. But now you get to run through the portal and reach the necropolis proper. Architecturally, it's the most compelling location. It's the Hall of the Necromancers, their main base. You can only get in and out using the portal that you just passed through. It has a suitable combination of militarism and majesty. More of a fantasy-themed Imperial Empire from Star Wars. Now, for the first time, the game's visuals actually work. The textures and geometry quality is still low, however the manufactured feel of the location, clearly man-made and not organic, hides a lot of the shortcomings that you saw earlier in the game when it was attempting to sell a natural environment. The gray-brown stonework, the red tapestries, and the purple windows with the dark, imposing lighting for such a grand building should break whatever was left of my immersion. But it was just so ridiculous and felt so over top that it actually worked. You make your way through the necropolis, fighting the necromancers, vampires, and zombies. You have a direction, and your internal motivation for revenge, theoretically, helps make Sereth feel more powerful than he had previously, thanks to the bolstered equipment found along the way. Causes the enemies to feel like a little bit less of a slog. Make your way through most of the map. We'll end up revealing that Liana is still alive and you are able to save her. Or not, it's not actually required. So here we are as we approach the 11th hour of the narrative. Sereth is given his first actual choice that he's actually able to make for himself. No longer just an angry mannequin, he has agency. Even better, the choice has actual consequences. As if you save her as I did, she tells you that there's a priest she's friendly with that can help with the whole Xana partially possessing you and cleansing you of the dark evil energy that you apparently now exude since the run-in with your pa and subsequent death and resurrection by Xana's dark magics. Save her or not, you just need to end up searching Arentir's room because he's not wandering about. Search away, learn a word, and then take the convenient shortcut elevator back to the portal. Thank you for not making me backtrack again. From there, you're able to reactivate it and head to the underbelly of Stonehelm with the new knowledge that will help you take down Arentir once and for all. Not really, you just learn where he's going to be, which makes me wonder how Sereth is planning on not getting picked up and thrown on another spike. Getting back to the surface through the sewer, you find a city not under siege, but subject to a full invasion now. The guards are being visibly harried and often outright routed by the undead and necromancer invaders. You fight your way through, dropping another undead cyclops on your way. There is an optional location that you can go to and purge Zana from you if you had saved Liana as I did. You get to take a dip in the holy hot tub. This gets rid of Zana and allows you to actually wield a sword you picked up some hours ago that has a plus 18 damage to the undead, and since that's basically all you're fighting for the rest of the game, it makes a pretty simple choice. You do end up getting the option to keep Zana even if you save Liana. You just have to go ahead and skip the church. Now, there ends up being an additional tomb section where you must fight off even more of Iron Tear's remaining forces as you take in another banger of environment. Much like the necropolis, this last tomb is actually able to sell itself, similar to the tomb section on the island. However, it's less decrepit, less ruinous. It's a pleasant blend of the earlier tomb and the necropolis. Liana makes one more appearance to reinforce the stakes. After getting to Iron Tear, you have a suitably climactic fight that feels completely at odds with what should be expected. The power level needed to take down a necromancer with magic as potent as Iron Tear's is ridiculous, and when you're taking him, as far as I can tell, only hours, maybe days after your last encounter, where he manages to thoroughly rock your shit, what causes you to be able to resist it? I know it wasn't the cheap shot that I was able to get in at the very beginning, but irrelevant. He's the big bad evil guy of the story, and you're the hero. The Dark Messiah, you will be victorious. As he falls, he remarks that you have defeated me and murdered the world. Leon quips about finding a way around the global catastrophe that is now so close, as Iron Tear dissolves the same way an undead does upon death. Interesting detail that comes far too late to provide any sort of redemption for the story. And this brings you to the third and final choice you're able to make. Claim the skull's power for yourself and seal away Father Dearest permanently, or provide it to your dear old dad and doom the world. My choice was to claim the power of the skull and seal away my dad. It seemed much more fitting given the previous choices I made. Now, the story wanted to say more than it did, as stories often do, especially in video games where you are afforded way more time than any other visual media. For example, the first season of Star Wars The Bad Batch has a runtime of about 7 hours, longer than my playthrough of this game, and I got lost and had to restart a few areas a fair few times. I would argue there's more characterization, more plot development in one of the 23-minute episodes of a made-for-streaming kids cartoon. But there is potential here. The Might and Magic series has had 10 mainline titles between 1986 and 2014, with another half-dozen spin-offs across the 3 decades the series was active. There's been an incredibly fleshed-out world with lore, compelling characters, grand motifs, in the hands of, say, Arkane Studios for a CRPG treatment, or back into the hands of Arkane now that they have had almost 20 years to refine their craft, it could be actually compelling. But this world doesn't look compelling, and for 2006, it could have been just as easily made with the Quake 2 engine. It's inexcusable. The game came out 6 months before The Elder Scrolls Oblivion and doesn't look half as compelling. It could and should be a fantastical world full of all of the wonderful tropes of the 80s and 90s fantasy epics, for better or worse. Linear adventure games may be coming back around and have their own renaissance period as CRPGs did over the last 5 years. Game design trudges forward regardless, but in a more cyclical nature. I hope there is, as this style of game did define a part of my teen years, and likely define many others. Thank you for watching, and I hope you come back again soon.